Hello, Nadir. Now, you recently said that your move into your dorm room at Harvard University was like being relocated to a Japanese internment camp. You were complaining about being far away from home, having these new roommates, and having terrible, terrible food. Well, I'm here to tell you, Nadir, that you are completely wrong. Unless you have to eat rice with ketchup, unless you have sand constantly blowing into your living area, unless you have to actually build up your dorm room from scratch in the first place, you have absolutely no reason to draw the comparison. Now, although these bits of trivia may seem trivial at the current moment, let me relocate your brain to a temporary area of enlightenment. Now, let's start with some background context, shall we? Now, the United States entered World War II in 1941 on the side of the Allied powers of the French, British, and the Soviets against the Axis powers of Japan, Germany, and Italy. Now, although before the war, the United States had adopted an isolationist policy, Japan had carried out surprise attacks on the military bases in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, resulting in 2,400 deaths and 1,200 injuries of U.S. military forces, whereas Japan only suffered 65 in deaths and injuries. Now, several years after the war, conspiracy theories arose that parties high in the U.S. government had known about these attacks prior, but had let them happen in order to draw the U.S. into the war and out of the Great Depression. But that's a topic for another day. Now, as a result of the extreme nativism that arose after the Pearl Harbor attacks, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt authorized Executive Order 9066 in 1942, which authorized the Secretary of War to prescribe certain areas of the United States as military zones, along with the deportation of Japanese Americans, Italian Americans, and German Americans to several relocation areas around the United States. Now, it is estimated that around 120,000 Japanese Americans were relocated to 10 different relocation centers around the western United States. Now, Nadir, I know how much you love first-hand witnesses, so today we have two very special guests. One, Fred Korematsu, the actual Fred Korematsu, best known for the United States Supreme Court case Korematsu v. United States. And second, Manosuke Nishida, grandfather of Michael Nishida, a friend of mine who I happen to know personally, and making some of the best sukemono in the entire world, Nadir.
Hello, Mr. Korematsu. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So, tell us about your trip from the time machine.
So, throughout the 60s, it was a little bumpy during the civil rights movement. I mean, the government was like, oh, not listening to the people, and I was like, what? And then we got to the hippie movement, and, you know, it was all smooth then. We all got flying, we all counterculture, and now we're here. Now I'm in the present.
Let's start off with you telling us a little bit about yourself, your ancestry, your place of residence, and general feeling during the time of the Executive Order of Roosevelt.
I was born in Oakland, California. I went to an American high school, and I had an Italian girlfriend. I faced racism throughout my whole high school experience. My girlfriend's parents, they wouldn't even let me go to their house because I was Japanese. Anti-Japanese sentiment was always around. So when Roosevelt passed Executive Order 9066, I wasn't really surprised at what happened. But I knew I was never going to listen to the American government and go to a concentration camp and let them take away my freedom.
Did you expect your case to make it all the way up to the Supreme Court?
I never did expect the court case to go all the way to the Supreme Court, but I did feel that the injustice deserved a lot of attention because we're a minority group and we are being stripped of our rights without due process.
How do you feel that you lost?
So after the loss, I was pretty disappointed because I thought I failed all of the Japanese Americans who had to be taken away from their homes, stripped of their lives by the American government. I thought that our case would free them and allow them freedom that they rightly deserve. And I also thought I failed all the children who were forced to have their childhoods taken away. They would no longer be able to have the American childhood that the parents come here for. So I was really disappointed in myself because I failed the children and I failed the people of Japanese American descent.
Wasn't that interesting? Now we have Manosuke Nishida, who was relocated to the Heart Mountain War Relocation Center in northwestern Wyoming, which is a barbed wire enclosed enclave with unpartitioned toilets, cots for beds, and 45 cents per capita for food rations. Even after the internment camps closed, anti-Japanese sentiment was still prevalent, despite the fact that not a single Japanese American had been convicted of treachery or espionage throughout the entirety of the war. Now, there was even a call to battle to prove the loyalty of the Japanese Americans, and the call was responded to with the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, a military unit comprised solely of Japanese Americans. Now, this military unit actually proved to be highly decorated and still stands today as one of the most decorated military units in the entirety of American war history, thus proving that Japanese Americans were loyal to the very end.
The conditions of the relocation centers such as Manzanar and Hart Mountain Relocation Center were survivable, but actually very, very dismal. The government provided only standard issue army cots, blankets, and a teeny tiny heating stove for each residence. To give each home a bit more personality, curtains, pictures, and posters were hung up on the plywood walls. In regards to meals, in order to supplement the ration meals provided by the camps by the United States federal government, many of the camps actually had to grow their own food. The typical breakfast consisted of boiled dried food, the typical lunch was made of sukemono, baked beans, and mac and cheese, and the typical dinner, of course, rice with ketchup. Now doesn't that sound tasty? Regardless, many started to see the injustice in the internment system and began the process of trying to compensate for the losses and inconveniences. In 1980, Congress formed a committee to investigate the legacy left behind by the Japanese American internment camps by interviewing many of those previously relocated and hearing their personal testimonies. In its final report, the committee described the internment camps as a grave injustice that was motivated by racial prejudice, war hysteria, and the failure of political leadership. Acting upon this report, Japanese American Congressman Robert Matsui and Norm Mineta were able to invoke a legislative response, calling for a formal apology from the President of the United States along with monetary compensation, which came in the form of $20,000 from the United States government, which was given to each surviving member of the camps. The Korematsu versus United States case stands today as one of the most important civil rights cases in United States history, alongside Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus Board of Education, Dred Scott, and Worcester versus Georgia. Hello, Mr. Shinida. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off with you telling us a little bit about yourself, your ancestry, your place of residence, and general feeling during the time of the executive order of Roosevelt.
So I was born in 1998 in Kireme, Japan. I moved here when I was 15 to my uncle's nursery in Gardena. I grow plant and flower. During time of World War II, me and my wife were forced to move by police to some internment camp in Wyoming. We had no idea where we were going or why we were going, but we trusted the government. I had been living in America for almost 30 years, and I trusted the government, so I never really had any distance with the government at all.
Tell us your story. Cut.
So, when we were forced to move, me and my wife had to give up our property, one of which was the strawberry fields I owned, which is now the Lama Mall. The strawberry fields I had to give to a man named Harry Lindenberg. He was a good friend of mine. He kept that and my house during internment. So he was a very good guy, and when we went to internment camp, the conditions were not horrible, but I had to basically fix up my own house, and we basically had to make our own toilets and our own systems. Food was very scarce. I ate a lot of rice with ketchup, not too much good food. Most food was cheap and easy access. But overall, the experience, I don't really like to remember it. It was a hard time for me and my wife, and I want to move past it. And I'd like to thank the government for repaying the Japanese people. And I like to wish the Japanese Americans the best in the future.
There is a saying in Japanese culture, "Kodomo no tameni," which means for the sake of the children. Now, this saying has been a standing strong pillar in the fight for the Japanese Americans in their internment camps. Now, throughout American history, we see these minority groups struggling to achieve their own rights and have their voices heard. And in the end, they persevere, they push on, and they gain what they justly deserve. Now let this be a lesson and a message to our posterity, that as children, you are the future leaders of America. You can choose your own destinies, and you will change this world for the better. Stand strong and think of the children.